Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Lachlan, and this is a message for Democrats and independents and people who realize that the GOP isn't really for them. We're coming up to the midterms, and we need to pay attention to some things that are important. Unfortunately, Democrats are claiming that the election was free and fair, but they didn't actually double check, so they can't possibly know. That's called an ungrounded claim. I teach research writing, and saying that something is true without having the research to back it up is called an ungrounded claim. So the Democrats are lying to you. Also, if you want to know if our elections are secure, watch the recent masterclass called Cyber Warfare, The Front Line is You. And there are examples of our election being interfered with discussed in that masterclass. So we know that it's not secure. Also, if somebody is saying that elections aren't secure and they're a mess and blah, 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 chances are that person knows because that person has already violated and interfered with those elections. So if somebody's saying an election is free and fair, it's pretty clear that they haven't interfered with their election. That's basically all we can take from those claims, right? From those individuals. But without looking at the ballots, we cannot possibly know whether an election was free and fair. Challenging an election in the age of AI, when there are deep fake hacks that resemble human behavior so closely that the only way we can look at it and find out if it's a deep fake hack is to compare the data to the ballots. These deep fake hacks are already on the voting computers which the GOP owns. They were active in 2024, possibly before, and they are still active today. Any close election may have been subject to these hacks that use the two voting systems that Election Truth Alliance has been talking about. The pattern that we're seeing in multiple locations in multiple elections is in high population areas at about 225 votes, the votes start switching from the Democratic to the GOP. And it stops before the point where the exit polls would be alerted. So it's trying not to be detected. And it's been used in not just the presidential race, but also other races. Some of the GOP senators now have won possibly because of this hack. Okay, and we don't know when it started. I think what this suggests is that the GOP has been a lot less popular than we thought. So, and I personally view this hack as stealing votes from people of color because it's high population areas. It only happens on the voting day. You can discover a red flag for this if the early voting and the mail-in voting were significantly different than the voting day. That is a red flag that this might have happened on those machines, and the only way you can rule it out is to double check. So, and that means getting the ballots to double check, which means challenging an election to get that in a close election. Now, the Democrats understandably are still under the long con of election denial, but to be clear, election denial only happens after a challenge has been answered. Challenging an election is not election denying. It is your responsibility as someone running for office in the age of AI to ensure that all the votes are counted. That's the way you as a leader stand up for us, your voters. So you need to challenge elections to rule out. And if you really believe that the elections were free and fair, challenge it to rule it out that there was interference. Because it's the only way you can rule out interference, to challenge it. And keep in mind that denying only happens after you've ruled out that there was a misrepresentation of who won, and then you still deny that you lost. So that denial happens, it begins after you've challenged an election. Okay? Again, somebody who is saying elections are subject to being violated, they are messed up, they are unclear, that person probably knows because they have already compromised the voting systems. The person who says they're free and fair, they believe that they were free and fair because they didn't violate them. So they're more ethical, but more naive. And if somebody, I personally believe, if somebody wants to run against the GOP, whether they're an independent or a Democrat, they should absolutely challenge the elections if they were using these two voting machines. And if you can't have the strength of character to stand up for your voters, then you should not run for office. Because we're living in the age of AI in a nation that is overconfident in its ability to avoid election interference. We were also overconfident that we would avoid a dictator taking over. Let's not be naive. Let's join other developed nations and reform our election systems so we're always double checking with the ballots. Until then, anybody who runs for office should be willing to challenge the election and then accept the results once the ballots are brought in as a redundant system to compare to the data. Please reach out to any of the leaders in your districts who are there to hopefully save our country. Stress this issue for them. Democrats, please wake up. You shouldn't be in office if you don't have literacy about election hacking. And if you aren't willing to stand up for our votes by checking the ballots, you should not run for office again or even for the first time. I don't know what's going to be left if we don't wake up to this reality.